Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jed Lee, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Join us right now from the absolutely beautiful city of Lancaster in the state of Pennsylvania. Our guest today is here to celebrate his debut middle grade novel. It's called We the Future. Please welcome to the show, Cliff Lewis. Hey, Cliff, how are you?
I'm doing great, Jed. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
I'm delighted to have you on the show. Before we go any further, I hope you don't mind. Cliff just shared with me a really amusing story. You know, we have authors come on, and there's so many authors talking about, you know, when they receive their first box of author copies of their book, and you see authors on social media doing their unboxing and all that stuff. You had a slightly different experience. Do you mind sharing what happened to your author copies?
Yeah, so it was definitely different. So I got a shipment in, and it was actually a funny situation because I got two boxes. There were two boxes that were sent to me. One was the early copies of my book. The other was some extra book jackets that were accidentally printed, and they sent them to me. So I got this big box, and it was really heavy. And I took it into my house. I cut it open. I had the cameras were rolling. I was ready to do my big, like, emotional book reveal, unboxing. And I opened it up, and it turned out it was just a massive stack of book jackets, like just book jackets. But I was looking at the shipping receipt, and I saw that two boxes had been delivered. So what I soon discovered after looking up the tracking number and following through on a few things was that a box full of my book had been, like, many copies of my book had been delivered to my porch, and then somebody stole it. So my book is just, I don't know who the pirate middle grade literature pirates are, or who's out there, like, peddling kids' books on some kind of, like, black market. Maybe it's underfunded middle school librarians. I mean, I know they always could use a little something extra, so maybe it's just going straight up to the shelves of a local underfunded middle school. That's what I like to imagine, at least. But yeah, just a weird letdown to open a box full of covers and then realize that my book actually should have been there, but was in fact stolen.
Well, I don't mean to laugh at your loss, but it is a funny story. And it's definitely something that a lot of us can relate to. And it'll be really interesting to see where those copies end up.
I know.
Yeah.
That's what I'm wondering. Yeah, like, is there some pop-up indie bookseller that's set, like, people sell the bootleg DVDs, like, on Times Square. Like, if somebody have a little book table going, just selling copies of We the Future. I'd actually love that. If that were true, I'd be thrilled. I mean, that would be free guerrilla marketing. I'd be into that.
If that's something, a lot of times, when I'd be performing at schools, principals would come up and say, "Do you mind if we videotape part of your performance?" And I would always say, "Sure, that's fine." And a lot of them would turn and go, "Wow, you're really cooperative." Like, because most artists are dead set against their performance being videotaped, and they're afraid. And I'm like, dude, if you can figure out a way to get my stuff bootlegged and get out there to the masses, I'd be extremely grateful. I don't need to get rich. It just would be great if the message got out there.
100%. That is exactly how I feel with this book too, because it was something, like, I wrote this book with a sense of, like, a really profound sense of purpose. Mm-hmm. So when I wrote this book, it was never about, like, pulling in royalty checks or whatever. It was about getting it into the hands of readers. So yeah, I feel exactly the same way.
So let's talk about that purpose and that message that is so important for you to get into the hands and the heads of readers.
Yeah. Yeah. So the book is called We the Future, and it is about a very anxious kid. So a kid who is like racked with fear, and it's mainly driven by having learned about the potential devastating impacts of the climate crisis. So he is lonely, he's feeling isolated, hopeless, and then seemingly out of nowhere, out of the blue, he is met by a girl from the year 2100. And she arrives specifically to find him and work with him because she wants to recruit him into a mission to launch a climate strike that is big enough to rewrite history and make the world that she came from a better and safer place. So it's a little bit science fiction. It's a little bit time travel. But it's especially like kind of behind all of it is a story about community organizing and direct action and how we can find our people. So it's like a story about making friends by saving the world and a story about saving the world by making friends. And that's We the Future. So it was something that meant a lot to me. The moment I had the idea for it, I felt like it just had to be written and had to be written as quickly as possible.
What was the spark that put that idea into your head, if any?
Yeah. Two things. So there was something put it on the back burner and then something really ignited it. So first, it was an experience I had. There was a local congressional campaign that people were getting really excited about in my community. My family volunteered to be a staging location for door knocking and canvassing in our section of town. So we had people coming in and out of our house, picking up packets, literature, and going out to knock doors. And it was like all the weeks leading up to the election. And our house just became this hub. And along the way, there were people who are coming to support this campaign from all over. And because the candidate had some really like strong, visionary, policies about tackling the climate crisis, there were climate activists who were coming from across the country, from across the world to come and help support this campaign. And we ended up having a whole crew of activists from a group called Sunrise Movement that's based out of the U.S. And they came and kind of helped us run the staging location. And I kind of saw firsthand their passion and the sense that these were like young climate activists. And they were so driven. They had such a sense of purpose that everything they were doing was in service of a higher goal, of something that was going to be of great significance in the decades ahead. So they didn't waste time. Like they would have a little break and they would be helping to coordinate things in our house. They'd take a little break and then they'd hop on a dialer and start like doing cold calls, like trying to get out the vote. Or if they had a little extra time, they'd pick up a packet or a clipboard and they'd go and actually knock some doors. And they just had this, and it wasn't motivated by a sense of anxiety. It was joyful. And it was very like there's a community vibe to the way that they worked together and with us. So that was like the back burner inspiration. And then a few months later, I was listening to a podcast with an author of a great nonfiction book about the climate crisis called The Uninhabitable Earth. His name is David Wallace Wells. And he was being interviewed. And he made this remark about how he finds it very odd that the world is staring down this like massive cataclysmic history-changing shift that we're facing in the way that life works, the way that industry works, the way that we live our lives, what parts of this planet we can actually inhabit. And he found it funny that there's not a lot of storytelling about it. He pointed out there's a lot of storytelling that feels metaphorical, kind of touching on it, kind of coming through it from like a side door, but he didn't see a lot of storytelling that was specifically just directly addressing the climate crisis. And I was, I'm a writer. I had been writing books. This is my debut novel, but I'd been working on novels prior to this. And I thought, that's something I can do. I feel like I can contribute something here. I can answer this prompt. So my mind just immediately triggered this idea of taking the climate crisis, which is a crisis that is unfolding in slow motion, because it's something that the consequences are seemingly far in the future. Mm-hmm. Many of them are happening now, and we need to be aware of that. But taking what looks like an abstraction so far into the future and bringing it into the present by literally bringing a character from the future into the present. And that was kind of what sparked the whole idea of this story. And yeah, the moment I had that idea, I think I remember pulling my car over to the side of the road and starting to just furiously type notes into my phone. I went home and I drafted this novel faster than I've ever written anything in my life.
Oh, fantastic. I can relate to that whole idea of getting an idea and you need to do something with it. Oftentimes I'll do the talk to text notes in my phone, and by the time I get home I look at it and go, what in the heck was that idea? I have no idea what that's supposed to be.
That is so funny that you say that. That is literally how I wrote almost this entire book, was voice to text.
Wow.
Yeah, I drafted it because, like I said, I wrote it as quickly as I could. So I found ways to fit writing into every nook and cranny of my day within reason, while working a day job, while being a father and a husband and having a family. And so one of the things I did every morning was I'd go for a jog around my neighborhood for like 45 minutes to an hour. And that was time that I wanted to try to use. So I would dictate the book into my phone while I ran. And it ended up actually becoming like a really productive way of getting words out, because there's no writer's block when your heart rate is like at 150 and, you're just pounding the pavement. Like the ideas just kind of flow. Like you just get them out quickly. You don't overthink anything. So it really helped me write the book.
Oh, could this be a future way to write all of your books?
Yeah, this is actually, you hit the nail on the head. That I do a lot of dictating now, because I've just consistently found that it helps me write dialogue that feels more conversational, because I'm literally saying it. And it also just helps me get ideas out without overthinking things. Like a lot of authors do things like, I've heard authors talk about the merits of like writing your first draft in Comic Sans, so that like putting it in kind of ugly fonts so that like you're not too precious about your individual word choices, because you're going to go back and have to practically rewrite the whole thing anyway. And for me, my equivalent of that is dictating. And if I just dictate, I get the words out, I get the book out, and then I can go back and clean things up. So my current work in progress, that's how I'm writing it, is dictation.
Yeah. As you're talking about this, we launched about a year or maybe two ago, around this time, a project called Protecting the Planet with Your Kids. And it was just a series of interviews with authors. And the idea was suggested by a young woman who was interning with us at the time. And the climate was in this issue is very important to her. But one of the things that she saw was that a lot of the messaging to kids was really kind of without hope. It was doom and gloom, and we're already screwed. There's not a lot we can do. You hear people, we got 12 years. Well, if we got 12 years, we're done, because we can't agree on anything now. There's no way we're going to agree on a solution in less than 12 years. So we looked for stories that were positive, that parents and kids could sit down and talk to their kids about the issue without freaking them out and terrifying them. Am I right in thinking that We the Future would fit into that mold?
Yeah. So, it speaks into that reality, because climate anxiety is increasingly becoming a mental health crisis for young people. And you can't exactly blame them. I mean, the basic facts are a little scary. And so what I did was I kind of presupposed that is a reality for a lot of young readers. And I started the story with the main character who was absolutely mired in climate anxiety. And that's where the story really begins, is in that place of a feeling of helplessness, of powerlessness. And the story is really about this character, Jonah, through meeting this girl, Sunny, from the future, and building a crew and learning what it means to organize together and act collectively. And him learning that this solution is not going to depend on any one person's personal choices. It's not something that he's ever going to be able to do on his own, but that with the help of other people working together side by side and coordinating their efforts and working to build collective power, they really can make a difference and change things. So I think, yeah, you're very right to bring up that crisis of climate anxiety. It's a real problem. And so the book speaks directly into that. But, I from the time I wrote this book, I wanted to write a book that was both brutally honest about the realities of the climate crisis for young readers and hopeful. So like, it's like pessimistic and optimistic, but certainly more optimistic than pessimistic. And the end result of the book, it becomes a very emotional story by the time you reach the conclusion. And I believe there's a profound sense of hope. Those are my favorite kinds of stories. I love Lord of the Rings, for instance. And if you read the actual, like, not just the movies, but read the writings by Tolkien, as the crisis of those stories continues to mount and mount and mount, he writes about this feeling of like this blanket of despair that rests over everyone's heart as they're staring down this challenge. And ultimately it's a story that like brings you soaring out from that despair into a place of hope and possibility when you're reading The Lord of the Rings. And I love capturing that in a story. And I feel like that's what I've done with We the Future is it does explore that anxiety, but it also shows you what hope looks like in this context.
That's awesome. We love it. And it sounds like a great novel. And we always advocate the Reading with Your Kids podcast advocates reading with your kids, not only when you're curled up on the couch with your kids reading aloud to them, but I think it's especially valuable to continue to read with our kids when they start reading middle grade novels, because there can be so many wonderful conversations that can come from reading a novel like We the Future, and talking about what are you afraid of, what are you concerned about, what are you anxious about, what can we do as a family.
Yeah. And it's a great opportunity for that and for having those kinds of conversations. And that's why I would recommend, I mean, this book is a great one to read with your kids. It's a great one for, you've got an older kid who's a more independent reader, for them to read it, and for you as an adult to read it and discuss it along the way. We do that with our 12-year-old all the time. He's a very advanced reader, and he'll plow through middle grade books. So we'll just recommend some of the ones that we know we would really enjoy, and we read them too. And then, the conversations with him are great. And there have been so many times where he reads late into the night. He's kind of an insomniac for a 7th grader, and he will sometimes finish a book and he'll wander out of his room and just be like, man, like he'll plop down onto the couch and just start talking about what he read. And in some of those cases, we've read it too, and it's just a great conversation.
Yeah. And, we think about, most families think about, we don't have any time with our kids. They're so busy. They have soccer, they have ballet, they have after school program, they have school. But typically we're driving them to these places. And so there's 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 15 minutes. And those are really 20 minutes that can be filled with conversation about a great book like this, about an issue like this. What wonderful, valuable time that can be spent with your kid. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And just finding those little pockets can make all the difference. And, because the time is tight. The activities that for me especially, and I'm dealing with a very busy year right now with, getting ready for a book launch, just being a parent, running things. My wife is actually in grad school right now, and her school is in Philly, and we're not quite in Philly. So she actually has to stay overnight for a lot of the weekdays, and I'm kind of like single dadding it Full House style while she's gone. And man, I mean, it's a busy life, but that it's an exercise in those little times where I'm, driving my kid to the bus stop, or I'm picking him up from after school activities. Like those are the times where we can talk about things and talk about what we're reading, or things that are important. I mean, half the time we're just talking about homework and making sure he's staying on top of it. But, it's all in those little pockets of time.
Yeah. One other thing that I want to touch on that you mentioned is, that your main character came together and formed a group of friends to deal with this issue, basically created a team to kind of deal with this problem. And one of the things that, as I look back on the kids that I went to school with and the kids that my kids went to school with, the ones that really have such fond memories of high school are the kids that belonged to a team, whether it was a sports team or the musical or but there was something where kids came together and they worked on something together and felt a sense of accomplishment, of empowerment. And so as we were talking about that, it just kind of reminded me to be really great if we could just encourage our kids in middle school and in high school to get involved in those activities, and not just so you can pad your resume, but just so they can really experience that sense of belonging and that sense of accomplishment.
Yeah, it's so profound. And this just happened with my middle school kid this year. He was in a school play for the first time, and just the camaraderie, the new connections that come from getting involved in something like that. It's a powerful thing. And it is equally true for climate organizing and climate activism. I mean, there are little crews being formed in schools all over the country, all over the world. And these are people who are aligning themselves around a common purpose. And I mean, that's fertile soil for friendships to grow. And as those friendships grow, that makes the organization stronger. And again, like I said before, the book I wrote is very much about saving the world by making friends and making friends by saving the world together. And it's profoundly true. And it's true in my own life as an adult even. Like I mentioned earlier, I got involved in a local campaign, and I remained involved in some of the local organizing that happened in the groups that were kind of formed around and before that campaign. And I have made so many friends, so many like deep friendships through that experience. That's my main circle of friends now, actually, was people I just met over the last few years through organizing together. Because when you find people that care so deeply about something that is as profound as this, you're going to form some pretty profound bonds with some of those people.
Fantastic. Please, Cliff, tell everybody where they can go to find out more about We the Future, find out more about you, and maybe get some clues as to where those porch pirates are that have your initial copies of the book.
Yeah, so I would say to learn more about my book. So the book is released on April 18th, 2023. So this spring it's coming. And you can pre-order it. If you're hearing this before the book launches, you could pre-order it, or you could order it, depending on when you're listening to this, just by going to my website, which is Hey Cliff Lewis. So Hey as in H-E-Y, and then C-L-I-F-F-L-E-W-I-S, HeyCliffLewis.com. That's my website, and you can check that out. You can also follow me on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok, which is the same handle in all of those socials. It's just Hey Cliff Lewis. And so that's where you can pre-order. That's how you can order. That's how you can keep in touch with me. The Porch Pirates, I mean, if anybody has any leads, hit me up. Let me know. If you see black market copies of We the Future for sale on any street corners in your neighborhood, I am all ears. I'm not going to report anybody, but I would love to shake the hand of the person who has found this really unique revenue stream of stealing wholesale books from authors' porches and reselling them. It's impressive. It's an impressive business model. So I'd like to shake their hand.
We've had a great time speaking to the author of We the Future, the debut middle grade novel from our guest, Cliff Lewis. Hey, Cliff, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you. Great talking to you.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. And we hope that you'll join us for the next exciting episode of the show. To make sure you don't miss a moment of the show, please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you get your podcasts. Big thanks going out to my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Jordan Saley, Will Cheever, Cassandra Masonet, Stephanie Davila. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.